Hello everyone. Welcome to the official LaunchBox Twitch channel. My name is AstroBob. Hope everyone is having a lovely day. Come on in, get comfy. Let us know where you're joining from, and we've got a little fun stream planned for you today. This is going to be all about optimizing LaunchBox for Windows handhelds. We'll get into the details in a second, but grab a drink, grab a snack, come on in. Good to see some folks in the chat already. Andrew's back, good to see you again. Multimedia Monorail, hello. And Barney10345, hello. How are we all doing? And what are we all playing these days? Alrighty, hello. Lovely to see some familiar faces again. How's everyone's start to the year been? I know we've had a couple of streams already, but a couple of weeks into January already, if you can believe it. We had some interesting news come out at CES this week, of course. Last week, of course. There was some great news that ties into the topic that we have today. We, of course, have the ever ongoing rumors about a big Nintendo announcement, but maybe we shouldn't get into that. But that's particularly exciting, so yeah, it's a good start to the year. But if anyone's been playing anything in particular, please let us know. Barney's been playing Star Wars Battle Pod, fantastic. I myself have been getting through a little bit of a backlog. Before the big thing I've got on pre-order is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which comes out on PC next week. I've been holding out for that. I do not own a PS5, so I've been very excited for that. Heard very good things. Comes out on Thursday next week, I believe. So a week, just over a week from today. And that's going to keep me busy, I hear, for a good sort of 150 hours. So plenty to be keeping me busy. Alrighty, we're going to give it a couple of minutes for folks to come on in, but just to let everyone know what's going to happen, this stream today is going to be focused on optimizing LaunchBox for Windows gaming handhelds, an ever-growing sort of popular niche in the PC market, although arguably not so niche anymore. It's become very sort of popular. There are a lot of devices out there these days, and of course they function a little bit differently to standard Windows desktop PCs, so we're going to be looking at workflows that are specifically dedicated to these handhelds. We've of course got our regular license giveaway that is going to happen later on in the stream, so if you're not a LaunchBox Premium license holder, then this could be your lucky day. We should be doing that towards the end of the stream, and of course as we go through, we'd love to hear any questions, things that you have. Please let us know in the chat. We can deviate. Can't imagine this one's going to be too long. It's not a huge topic, but there are some interesting tidbits and workflows that I'd love to share with you all today. So while we wait for the rest of the folks to join, please let us know if anyone here is a handheld PC owner. You may have heard from my previous streams, I personally very much jumped on this bandwagon, mainly because I don't actually have a desktop PC. The main driver that I use for LaunchBox and pretty much all of my gaming is a Lenovo Legion Go. I used to have an Aya Neo Next, and yeah, these devices have been serving me pretty well. Pretty much do all of my gaming on that single device. More recently, adding more devices to my collection. I picked up a Retro Pocket 5 last year, and that's a nice complement with LaunchBox on Android combined with LaunchBox on PC. Andrew Speck says, I have the Legion Go with DualBook, Bazzite, and Windows 11. Yes, of course, Bazzite been making some great waves recently. Been hearing so many good things about Bazzite. For those who don't know, Bazzite, I believe, is a sort of offshoot of SteamOS, a sort of Linux distro that will mimic what SteamOS can do, so a sort of Steam Deck type experience, but on a Windows PC. Of course, for those who do run on sort of handhelds or just Windows in general, I'm sure you're fully aware of the quirks and some of the sort of jank that can come with Windows. And I feel it gets a bit of a bad rep sometimes, but of course it is an operating system that is not primarily designed for gaming. And so obviously they're making strides in trying to address some of those concerns, but it can be a little bit sort of finicky sometimes. Whereas, of course, SteamOS is a very friendly sort of controller, friendly first sort of console-like experience. And so that's specifically what we're going to look at today, is trying to sort of get around some of those Windows quirks, especially when you're on a handheld where you have a smaller screen size, you have a battery that you have to be considerate of, where you don't have that on a desktop. And of course, only if the Steam Deck counts. Of course, the Steam Deck does count. Obviously, the elephant in the room being that LaunchBox currently does not run natively on the Steam Deck. You've probably heard that there are some ongoing projects internally that should hopefully make that a possibility in the future. We're very aware that Steam Deck and just Linux in general is a popular platform of choice for folks to get around a lot of the Windows jank that we've just been talking about. And so hopefully this year you'll be able to hear some updates on how that's going. But of course, yes, right now LaunchBox does not run natively on Steam, the Steam Deck or Linux, but it is something that we are very aware of and working on. Hello, hello. Good to see you, Fishbob. How are you doing? Always lovely to see our familiar faces. So I think we're going to go ahead and get started in a couple of minutes. Like I said, what we'll do is we're focusing very much on optimizations and sort of settings. How can we tweak our Windows handheld PC devices to work well with LaunchBox and Big Box? So like I said, we're running off handheld PCs that of course can be docked and very much mimic a Windows desktop. Every single stream that you've seen me do is run exclusively off a Legion Go that is just hooked up to a monitor and PC, so it works in a pinch for sure. But we're going to be focusing very much on the sort of handheld experience. And so like we said, just having a quick look at some of the most kind of popular PC handhelds these days, I'd say probably the two most common ones outside of the Steam Deck, we're focusing very much on Windows today, would be the ROG Ally and of course the X revision that came out last summer, and the Legion Go. Those are the two most popular ones, certainly within the US, and just because of availability. The Legion Go, of course, had some exciting announcements at CES last week, where not just a new version of the Legion Go, but of course a SteamOS dedicated device. And of course they're giving you the choice to choose between your operating system. I think it's a great move, and of course I'm sure a lot of other manufacturers will hop on that bandwagon in the future. But of course they're not the only players. There are some really great devices, especially coming out of the Chinese market. You've got companies like Ioneo, 1X, GPD. All of these companies make some fantastic devices. You know, like I said, I personally owned the Ioneo Next when it came out. Ioneo, of course, infamously releases a lot of devices, and there's more choice out there, but of course they do move on quite quickly. I was a big fan of their Ioneo Air. If anyone saw that one, it was a 7-inch sort of. It was a bit smaller than that actually. No, it was a sort of smaller Windows device that a lot of these smaller devices usually run Android. You've got things like the Retro Pocket 5. You've got the Odin 2, but it was one of the smaller Windows handheld devices that I really enjoyed. 1X Player do some really great things. The 1X Fly, I think, is the flagship that they have. And of course, GPD have things like the GPD. Here we go. I've actually got a list here. So some of the more popular ones, obviously the Steam Deck. We have the ROG Ally X, which I hear fantastic things about. I personally would love to own one of those. The Legion Go, which is what I run. This is it, the Ioneo Air, which had what display did it have? Much smaller one. The GPD Win 4. This is a very good one that has a flip-up screen with a sort of a tactile keyboard that you can use. And I hear that GPD's laptops like the Win 2, the Win 4 are fantastic devices. I know a lot of people swear by those, and they've been around for a long time. But yeah, there is a lot of choice. There is absolutely a lot of choice, and anything that can run Windows can run LaunchBox. Not just LaunchBox, but Big Box as well. We are going to be covering both applications today because, of course, if you're a free user, you won't have access to Big Box. LaunchBox, obviously designed more for desktop use with mouse and keyboard. Big Box is really where what I would recommend and where those optimizations come into play for things like using a controller first on sort of more tactile displays. But we're going to be looking at both. We're going to be looking at how you can tweak both to your liking on a handheld. And of course, the new Legion Go S with 32. Yes, of course, it comes with 32 gigs of RAM. Could be the V1 specs on P1 at launch. Yeah, 16 gig is too low for me. Yes, I mean that certainly I think is a trend that I hope is coming into play more this year. Obviously, most of these handheld devices are running around 16. I know the ROG Ally X has 24 now, which I think is a step in the right direction. But yes, 32 would be a nice bump. So of course, let us know what else anyone is running. And me personally, I think it works quite well having a handheld Windows device, but also a handheld Android device, where the Android device sort of is a smaller subset of my collection that complements the bigger sort of Windows build. Eventually, what I would love to do is actually have a proper desktop build where I can have everything. You have a sort of offshoot of that on one of your Windows handhelds, and then a smaller offshoot on the Android side. But yes, using Big Box on the ROG Ally. Yes, of course, Windows 11 Pro, A++, fantastic. Yes, Big Box is absolutely the way to go, and that is what we are going to look at today. So I think we've talked enough about handhelds, and as you can tell how much I love them. We are going to go ahead and get started. For those who are just joining, my name is AstroBob. We're going to be looking at optimizing LaunchBox for Windows handheld gaming PCs. We have a license giveaway coming up later on in the stream as well, so make sure to stick around. And of course, please let us know your questions as we go through. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. So what I'm actually running off right now is my Legion Go. It's a handheld desktop PC. Handheld gaming PC. The one I'm running, I've popped in a 2 terabyte hard drive, so enough space to store all of my games. It's running 16 gigs of RAM. It does the job, and the resolution of the display is, I believe is it 1440p or 1600? It's the 16 by 10 version, whichever that one is. But what I have here is the nice thing about the Legion Go is that it has detachable controllers that are very similar to the Nintendo Switch. They look like this. I believe they call them the True Strike controllers, but this is what I am going to be using primarily to operate the entire build today. Obviously, the setup and stuff, I'll be using keyboard and mouse, but when we're talking about navigating and playing games, this is exclusively what I'm going to be using. And so what I want to do is kind of show you how easy it can be to use LaunchBox with a controller sort of first, controller first mindset. Now, a lot of these handhelds will have controllers either sort of attached to the unit itself. Obviously, most popular ones like the ROG Ally, they operate like that. Ones like the one of the 1X versions, I can't remember which one, and of course the Legion Go will have detachable controllers like this. But of course, any third-party controller can be used to control LaunchBox, and this does apply for folks who are using things like Windows tablets, maybe laptops with an external controller, and of course even desktops with a external controller. But we're going to be very much focusing on assuming that you're dealing with sort of reduced screen real estate, you're running off a battery, and you are primarily going to be using this on the go. So that's the use case we're going to be focusing on today. Okay? Alrighty, so like I said, for anyone who uses one of these, certainly for the initial setup, I would highly recommend docking it to a external monitor with a mouse and keyboard. It's certainly going to help you, but the idea is that once we get all of this set up, we are going to be running exclusively off just the regular touchscreen interface and our attached controllers. Okay? So let's jump in. Let us know if you have any questions as we go along. We're going to do a little bit of sort of housekeeping before we get started, just to set the scene. So obviously I have LaunchBox installed on my Legion Go here. This is a demo build I've been building over the last couple of streams. Nothing too crazy, but what we are going to do is we're just going to talk a little bit about the Windows environment. Of course, LaunchBox is running on top of Windows. Windows is the operating system that a lot of these devices will run on. And if you ever use one of these handhelds, I think the biggest criticism that people have is that Windows is not primarily optimized for a sort of gaming environment. A lot of these interfaces run into a couple of issues with Windows, and I'm sure a lot of you have experienced that firsthand if you own some of these devices. Now, the first thing to be aware of is, of course, unlike a desktop build where you are sort of, jacked into power at all times, these gaming handhelds are running off battery. And so the primary thing you have to be concerned with is what they refer to as the TDP. Without going into too much detail, TDP is basically how much power you're pushing into the device. So when you're playing high-end games, you're going to want to make sure that you are giving it enough power to be able to play that game at a respectable sort of frame rate. at the trade-off of course, the battery life. Now, I am plugged in at the moment, so I'm on full battery, but a lot of these devices will come with sort of their own version of power management profiles. We're not going to go into too much detail. This is what the Legion Go's one looks like, for example. But basically, all of these devices will allow you to configure the power profile. When you're plugged in, of course, it doesn't matter because you can just run it at max and it'll be fine. The reason I'm telling you this is just to be aware of this when we're running LaunchBox. Now, LaunchBox as the application itself doesn't need much power at all. You know, the Legion Go, for example, can go down to say sort of 3 to 5 watts in terms of TDP. Even at the lowest power settings, LaunchBox as an application will run absolutely no problem. It's not like it's not doing anything graphically intensive. The application itself will run at a very, very low sort of TDP. Obviously, that comes more into play when you're talking about the games that we're playing. When we get into Big Box, that is where you may just want to consider what TDP you are using. And it very much depends on the sort of theme that you're using, how much sort of crazy effects and transitions and media you have. It will still absolutely run. It will have no problem running at the lowest TDP. But it's just to be aware that in terms of making it a very sort of smooth experience, you may just want to consider bumping that up. And of course, we'll look at that when we get on to the Big Box section later on. So that's just something to be aware of as we go through. Now, I've got my, I'm running on the max sort of performance power profile. For now, that's fine, just because I'm plugged in. I don't have to worry about battery life, but just something to be considerate of depending on your device. And of course, each device will have their own way of sort of managing power profiles, but usually they all have some version of what they call TDP. So that's just something that, if you hear me refer to that, we're talking about the power profile. The other thing to be aware of is the resolution of the device that you're running. Now, you may have noticed that this looks a little bit blown up, and that's because I am actually mirroring exactly what is being shown on my Legion Go. Now, like I said, the Legion Go runs at a... it's 1600p is the display. That's actually quite big. I think it's a little bit overkill, in all honesty. I much prefer the sort of 1080p display of the ROG Ally X. I think it's a more reasonable trade-off between battery life and the sort of quality that you get. You know, Steam Deck, for example, is 1800p. And the reason I bring this up is a lot of these devices will allow you to change the resolution that your display is running at. Now, this is actually showing 800p right now. It's actually not doing that. It's actually running at 1080, and that's because I'm docked at the moment. But basically, they will allow you to choose the resolution of the device that you're running. Now, our media in LaunchBox is generally pretty high quality. The media that comes down from the LaunchBox games database is pretty high quality. And you can, there is a noticeable difference. So for example, if I run my Legion Go screen at 1800 versus 1600p, there is a noticeable difference, at least to me, in terms of the quality of the media. So personally, I like to have that resolution bumped up on the display. And of course, this is entirely dependent on the device that you run. You know, if you're running the ROG Ally X, for example, 1080p is a perfectly reasonable resolution and your media will look great. But of course, you can lower that if you need to, like 720. But it's just to be aware, if you've got one of these devices and you load up LaunchBox and you think, oh, my media doesn't look very good, just be aware of what the resolution of the display is that you're running. That can be something to watch out for. So what you'll see today in terms of how the taskbar is managed, because it's mimicking exactly what is what my Legion Go would be doing when I'm in handheld mode, you can actually see what this would look like on a much sort of more compressed display. Okay. The final thing we just want to be aware of is the if you go into Windows and if you go to Display, so I'm mirroring my displays right now, a lot of these devices will actually scale up the Windows interface. This is actually what the Legion Go does for me by default, but of course you can change that. Normally, if you run at 100%, on screens like this, that can be a little bit small, and this is very much personal preference, but a lot of these devices will enforce one of these scaling percentages out of the box. You can, it's just to be aware that you can change this. And when you change this, this will impact how obviously LaunchBox looks in terms of things like the text size, but also in terms of how much screen real estate you have to be able to view things. So just something to be aware of. For me, this is absolutely fine because this looks great on the Legion Go screen. And of course, also it looks better on stream because you can see things a little bit bigger. So that is something to just be aware of, is the display size and how much it sort of blows that up. Okay, and then the final thing before we actually jump into LaunchBox is taskbar. Different devices will do this differently, and again, it is very much down to personal preference. I prefer to actually have the taskbar sort of automatically hide itself, and that gives me more screen real estate for LaunchBox when I'm running on a handheld. Things like when you go into Big Box, for example, that's designed to actually obviously hide the taskbar anyway. But if you're using LaunchBox on one of these devices, just to give you that little bit more screen real estate, you can actually choose this to automatically hide. If you go to taskbar settings, and then you have the option somewhere, taskbar behaviors, to automatically hide the taskbar. Okay. So now this is looking pretty good for me. I have LaunchBox running on this device. We're running at 1080p right now. And I've got plenty of screen real estate to be able to start using LaunchBox. Okay, so we're going to jump into the actual LaunchBox settings side of things. Let us know if anyone has any questions. Okay, so like I said, it's no secret that, of course, LaunchBox was designed for desktop use. Obviously, it came around a long time before handheld PCs and certainly sort of handheld gaming PCs became popular. So you are very much running up to the limitations of what you can do in that sort of environment. But there are ways that I feel you can tweak it so that it works just a little bit better. Now, the first thing that you'll notice here is we have obviously 3 sections to LaunchBox. We have the sort of searching and platform category section. We have the games in the middle, and then we have our games details pane over on the right. Very much down to personal preference, but you may want to choose to hide certain aspects of these. So for example, if you wanted to, for example, get rid of the games details page and you prefer working with just a list of games, you could absolutely do that. You can use the box art size up here to sort of resize the box art so you can display more on screen at once. That's absolutely fine. Or you could go absolutely full screen and get rid of the left-hand navigation bar, and then you're purely just working with a list of games. You know, for example, on the Legion Go, it has a sort of little trackpad that I can use to actually mimic mouse movement. So I could move around, I can select some games. A lot of these devices will, I think most of them will be touchscreen based. So for example, if I just reach over, I can actually tap over onto various games. Touch input is definitely the more friendly way to do things. You know, things like the ROG Ally will have a way to mimic mouse movement, but you know, on a screen like that, and when you've got these sort of touch points on screen already, it can be easier just to use the touch screen to actually navigate around. So again, very much down to personal preference, but it does work, and you have multiple ways of doing this. Let's just make these a little bit bigger. There we go. What will also work is a lot of these devices will bring up an on-screen keyboard when you need to enter text. So for example, my search bar on the top left, if I actually reach over and tap on that, you'll see how it brings up an on-screen keyboard. So you can actually, you know, just use the touchscreen to type in something. I'm gonna use my mouse for now, and I'm just gonna type in, for example, Sonic. And there we go. And this is not a LaunchBox thing, this is a Windows thing, but anytime you find one of these inputs that requires text, generally it will bring up the on-screen keyboard for you to be able to do that. This is quite nice because it allows us to sort of search games in LaunchBox. It's a bit more user-friendly within Big Box as well, but that can be a nice way that you can narrow things down without needing a keyboard and mouse to be able to navigate through things. But yeah, trackpads on the Steam Deck are its best feature. Of course, Steam Deck with its 2 trackpads, one on each side. I'm definitely on Team Trackpad. Like I said, the Legion Go just has one, and that's primarily for navigation. I wouldn't say I would use this one for sort of gaming. Obviously, the Steam Deck's trackpads are can be used for gaming itself, and I know a lot of people that swear by that control input. But certainly just for navigating, especially on a Windows environment, I personally find it's very helpful to have a single trackpad where you can sort of mimic mouse movement. And then, of course, if you need access to that on-screen keyboard, there are a lot of functions that you can do within that environment. And we need LaunchBox running on Legion Go S powered by SteamOS. Exactly. Of course, we were just talking about the Legion Go S, which is the first device to officially work with an official build of SteamOS. That will be very exciting, and of course, yes, that will be a fantastic companion to LaunchBox. Okay, so let's start diving into the details of how can we make this more user-friendly on our handheld. So the first thing we're going to look at is we're going to go into Options, and we're going to look at this section here called Startup Applications. You may use this already, and of course, everything I show you here certainly applies to the desktop if you're running in a desktop sort of environment. But these are things that I want to call out that I think are particularly handy when you're running on a handheld with sort of limited use cases. So startup application is pretty self-explanatory. The use case here is that when you open LaunchBox, it will also launch these specific applications at the same time. Some examples could be if you have some overarching sort of controller management profiles that you use, if you have various storefronts that you want to open up at the same time that LaunchBox does, so that you don't have to wait for that storefront to load whenever you choose a game. There are countless use cases, and I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with this, but I do want to call it out because it is often forgotten that you can add applications to be launched alongside LaunchBox. And again, the use case we're having here is that we want LaunchBox to be the primary sort of interface of our handheld. You know, a lot of these handhelds will come with their own version of some sort of launcher, combined with power profile management, things like that. But in our use case, we want LaunchBox to be the primary sort of game interface for our devices. So in order to make that sort of fully feature complete, we're going to use Steam as an example. So when I open up LaunchBox or Big Box, I want it to launch the Steam application. So all you do is just add application. We're going to go, we are going to go to the location of Steam, and we are going to find the Steam application. And there we go. Pretty self-explanatory. You have the option to allow multiple instances, and that could be if you're running an application that needs multiple instances, you could do that. Obviously, Steam, we don't want to do that. You have the option to start with both or LaunchBox or Big Box. In our case, we are going to select both, and we're going to hit OK. Now, what I'm going to do is just quickly show you what this looks like. I'm going to close down LaunchBox, and I'm going to open it back up. We're just going to wait for that process to close. Try that again. And there we go. Now, Steam also opens up when LaunchBox does. Now, that's fine, but it's a little bit annoying that it opens up on top of LaunchBox. And so I don't want to have to go and minimize that every single time. So what I'm going to do is go back into my startup applications. And this is where command line parameters comes into play. If anyone's familiar with command line parameters for emulators, this works in exactly the same way. You can basically supply a command line parameter to an application so that when it launches it, it does certain things alongside it. Now, I know that Steam has a command line parameter that essentially lets you open it in a minimized state, and that is -silent. These, of course, would very much depend on the application. I don't know if that applies to other launchers, but you may just want to research what those are. But now, what will happen is let's just close down Steam. Let's close down LaunchBox. Wait for that to do its thing. And now we are going to open up LaunchBox once again. There we go. And now what will happen is Steam no longer opens up in the forefront, but if I go into my taskbar, I can actually see that there it is. It has successfully loaded. but it just does it minimized in the background, which is lovely. And now Steam is running happily in the background so that if I'm ready to play some games, I can obviously just launch them and then they're ready to go in the background. Now, of course, you don't have to do this. The first time you open a game that's based on Steam from LaunchBox, it will just open Steam in the background and it will run it. It will do that no problem. But of course, Steam, takes sort of around 15 seconds, 20 seconds or so to launch. So if you want to have that just preloaded, have it running in the background, then you absolutely can do that. And certainly if you have like a big box build, for example, you want to make sure that everything is ready to go. You can certainly look at adding various applications to this startup applications. Storefronts are obviously a good example, but if you're using any kind of, say, controller management profile, I think it's called like Xbox 360 CE, for example, is a little utility that allows you to map various controllers to a standardized input. So if you use that and you have multiple controllers, you're going to want to make sure that it loads with LaunchBox so that that's always running in the background. There are other ways you can do this within the Windows environment itself, but we're going to be setting this up in LaunchBox so that it's all kind of triggered from LaunchBox. LaunchBox is that sort of kickoff point for our gaming experience. And of course, it's a very good point, Andrew Speck. Of course, it may not be, depending on your device and the sort of memory that you have available, you may not want to run them in the background at all times. Of course, some of them are notorious for taking up a lot of RAM. And of course, if you're only playing, say, emulation, you may not want to have Steam running in the background at all times. Of course, very much down to the device that you're using, sort of the games that you play, personal preferences, things like that. Like I said, it's not the only way that you certainly don't need to do this. If you launch a Steam game from LaunchBox, it will just open it up, and if you're happy to leave it like that, then that's fine. But if it's your primary sort of way of gaming and you want to have that ready to go, then that is a use case that you can do. But yes, of course, when we are talking about handhelds, we are dealing with a limited amount of memory. Like we talked about earlier, most come with sort of 16 gigs these days. That is looking to change, sort of hopefully in the right direction, but just something to be aware of. Okay. So we're going to have a look at another hidden little feature that I personally really love and didn't actually realize just how useful it was. And that is, depending on how you like to sort of navigate around your device, you're dealing with a limited screen size. And so depending on what you're doing, you are going to have to either minimize or sort of close applications. Now, it's fine to minimize LaunchBox. It will happily sort of run in the background. But of course, if you close LaunchBox, that is actually shutting down the application. It's doing all of its stuff that it needs to do. And then, of course, the next time you want to open it, you see how that message that keeps showing up means that it needs to... It does a little bit of cleanup after you shut down the application before you can next run it. And so the next time you run it, it will actually have to go through that initial startup process, which is okay. You can see it's not too long on my device, and we do have a guide on how you can optimize that startup process. But there is a very underutilized feature that can be really helpful for this, and that is the system tray section of the options. Now, the system tray is basically referring to this little section here. So Steam, for example, it has an icon that is running in the system tray. You have the actual application in the taskbar itself, but a lot of applications will run sort of in the system tray. Some of them, things like safely removing sort of hardware and media. Certain utilities, for example, will run in the system tray, but don't have actual applications that show up in the taskbar. Now, the reason I'm telling you this is you have a couple of options here. You can say minimize to system tray and close to system tray. Right now with LaunchBox, there is nothing in that system tray. But what I can do is I can say close to system tray. Now this is quite nice because what it does, if I close LaunchBox, the application is no longer being shown in my taskbar, but it is running happily in the background in I'm not sure if I'm referring to this correctly. I guess the sort of hidden area of the taskbar. And what will happen now is when I actually load that back up, you see how that was instant. So instead of having to close the application and go through that startup process every single time, I can just sort of silently put it away in the system tray, and then when I next go to open it, it will be readily available. Now, I believe you might ask, well, what's the difference between doing that and actually just minimizing it? Correct me if I'm wrong, someone, but I believe when you put it in the system, when you close it to the system tray, it's actually utilizing fewer resources than if it's just minimized in the background, because that's just, the application is still front and center. It's just that it's not highlighted on your screen. Whereas if you actually close it out to the system tray, it's using less resources. I hope I'm not incorrect in saying that, but of course, someone more intelligent than me will tell me if I am. But I really like this. What we want to do as well is it says show notification when it's been sent to the system tray. I don't need that. I'm just going to turn that off. But I really like this because now I can, I can minimize it if I need to sort of quickly navigate away. But if I don't need it for a while, I can just close out of it. It'll pop it into the system tray down here. And then when I need it, I don't have to run through that whole startup process every single time. Fantastic. Glad to get the clarification there. Yeah, so fewer resources, but still running. And of course, when we are running on fewer resources, every little bit helps. So very small feature, but I actually really like this. It's how I run it. I will just have it closed to the system tray if I'm, don't need it for a while, but then of course I can bring that back up straight away. So let's just see what that looks like. Of course, if I close, it's not in my taskbar anymore, but it's happily running in the background. Steam is doing the same thing. I think a lot of the storefronts work in a similar way, where they will run happily in the background until you need them, and then of course you can bring them back without having to start it up every single time. Okay, now another reason this can be quite nice is a lot of these devices will have, because they're assuming you're operating with a controller or the built-in controls, they will have various shortcuts that mimic functions within Windows. So popular functions like accessing the Windows menu with Windows plus D, Alt Escape, you've got Alt F4 for closing applications, things like accessing the task manager, things like that. And so what we just turned on combines quite nicely. If I'm exclusively using a controller and I do, say, Alt F4, for example, which is just closing LaunchBox, and then, of course, it's just going down to the system tray down here. Now, that didn't quite work, but there we go. And that's because, of course, there are a ton of different functions that you might need within Windows, so they try and give you the most important ones you can access with a controller. Okay. So let's now that we've talked about a lot of sort of optimizations and how things run and things like that, we haven't actually looked at how can we make this to look much better and more optimized for the device that we are running. Now, as you've probably seen, if you're running on a big monitor, if you ever watch any of our product manager Fairend streams, I'm not sure what monitor he's running, but he has a nice sort of big long list of games. It has at least sort of 7 or 8 games per row, whereas of course on mine, because I'm running on a different display, I'm only showing 2 games, and that's fine. But if I have a really long list, maybe I want to see that, I can go here and reduce the size of the box art. But you can see there, like here, for example, there's a lot of wasted space. There's actually a lot of space between these boxes. So I want to get a nice trade-off of showing more boxes on screen whilst reducing some of that space. And this can actually be customized. So we're going to go into Tools, and we're going to go to Options. Now, before I do that, let's just put this back to, we're going to do 2 boxes per row. And you can see there that there is a fair bit of wasted space right in the middle. So what I'm going to do is going to go to options. I'm going to go down to viewing, boxes, and spacing. Now, the two main things you'll want is these top two. Everything down here is referring to the old default theme, so you can actually safely ignore those. But you have the aspect ratio and you have the horizontal and vertical spacing. Now, what I'm going to do is actually just set these to 0. And that's going to give me the most compact version of this. And if I hit OK, now, it may have been hard to tell, but you can actually probably see there is much, much less space between these boxes now. Of course, you might be thinking, well, why is it not actually squashing the boxes together? It's not the boxes themselves, it's actually the sort of outline of that box. So you can see when I highlight it, it's talking about the space between those. And I believe it may have to leave a little bit between that, even though it's set at 0. It allows for, things, if you have like badges enabled, for example, it has to allow for that as well. But that now is looking a lot better. The boxes have actually become much bigger because the spacing between them is much less. So what I can do now is I can actually go and turn this. Let's put 3 boxes per row. There we go. So that to me now is a nice trade-off between the box art is still nice and big, but it's a little bit more compact. And of course, if I really want to, obviously this game's details page is taking up quite a lot of space here. I can actually just go and remove that. And now I can get even more, and that's looking really nice now. So that to me is a pretty nice trade-off of box art versus spacing. So who would have thought? This is how into the weeds we get. I commend all of you for joining a stream where we're looking at adjusting the spacing between boxing. But hey, I know our community does care about this kind of stuff. And especially when we're running on a smaller screen, this can be quite useful. Okay. So now we are going to look at what I think is the most important, and that is how do we make this controller friendly? How do we operate this with a controller? How can we make it so that we don't have to go and mimic a mouse or sort of use mouse input to navigate around? And I will say that, like we said, LaunchBox is certainly not designed from a controller first point of view. That is certainly more Big Box's area, but there are things that you can do. So if you are running on the free version, you don't have access to Big Box. In a pinch, there are certain things that you can do to make it a little bit more friendly. And that's great. Orion's Angel says, I've been using LaunchBox since it started. I had no idea they added this feature. Yes, lots of hidden gems within the options. We've touched on a few today that I don't think I've ever touched on previous streams. Things like startup applications and box spacing. Andrew Speck says, I checked my build. The 2.6 gigagram when it's in the foreground, and when it's close to tray, it uses only a few megabytes less, but it's still not using the CPU. But it's not using CPU. Okay, yeah. So yeah, I think the use case is if you're looking to save on the actual resources that it uses, it may not be a huge difference compared to just obviously having it running in the background and minimized. Hopefully it will be a little bit better, but it's more from a sort of usability standpoint of sort of, if you want to clean it out of your taskbar, for example, if you don't need it for a while, you can sort of hide it off to the side there. But yeah, good. Thanks for checking that. Hey, so we're going to go into tools. We're going to go to options, and we are going to go to game controllers all the way down at the bottom. The first thing to note is that these are separate controls from that within Big Box. Big Box shares a lot of the same sort of shortcuts and things like that, but because they are technically separate applications, just be aware that these are separate settings within LaunchBox. So what we'll look at first is on game controllers. The first one is enable game controllers, and this will allow us to use a connected controller to control various aspects of LaunchBox. So the first thing you do is obviously choose the device. You choose the one that you have connected. Now, this one can be quite useful, which is use all attached controllers. If this is off, it's only going to use the device that you have selected here to actually control aspects of LaunchBox. If you turn this on, any connected controller is going to be able to carry out those same functions. So it says, of course, the use case here is that if you have more than one game controller for your system, it can be problematic when it comes to things like disconnected devices, drivers, things like that. So just be aware of that. The use case here is if you have, say, like an arcade cabinet where you have an arcade stick that is controlling aspects of LaunchBox, and you have an external controller as well. You can have both of those actually control LaunchBox. You can also set LaunchBox as the Windows shell and use fewer resources. Of course, yes, that is something you can do. We're going to look at that in a second when we get into Big Box, but that is another option as well. So these two options, fairly self-explanatory. We're going to leave it as it is for now because they've only got one controller connected. But mappings is where the fun starts. Now, some of these have been configured by default, and I'll be honest, not all of them are particularly useful, but there are a couple that in a pinch, I think, can be good to know. So we've got things like select, back, and play game. These can all be quite handy, and I've set this to 1, 2, 3, 4 basically means A, B, X, Y on my controller. So for example, if I'm on top of a game and I press Y, it actually loads that game straight away, which is great. I can use the D-pad to actually navigate around my games. Now it's doing something here where you'll see how it's doing double inputs. That is actually on purpose. I'm going to show you exactly why it does that. But for now, let me close out Steam because that is the reason why. There we go. We'll come back to that because it is an incredibly frustrating thing that once you know how to fix it. But yes. So using the D-pad, I can actually navigate around my games. This is looking quite nice. I can use, for example, the B button to open, or the X button to open the right-click menu. So, for example, I could go to Media, I could go to View Images. Of course, most of this you would probably do with a touchscreen or a mouse, but in a pinch, you can actually do that. I can navigate around. We can press Y to load up this game. Load up Echo the Dolphin. The lovely ambient music there, if anyone's played Echo the Dolphin on the Mega Drive. A very sort of relaxing but creepy and very, very scary game. As a kid, this game, yeah, it was. It has some weird themes, but it can be a lot of fun. I mean, we could get distracted and just swim around for the next hour, but I think we need to crack on. Woohoo! Okay. That. So let's go back to our controllers. So that's what these 4 functions are. We've got the context menu, which is the right click. We've got play game. We've got select and back, which is basically back and forward. Toggle sidebar and toggle game details. This is quite useful. I've got this mapped to L and R on my controller, which what it will do is it will close the platform category section, and it will open or close the game details page. So with a controller, this is actually quite nice for just quickly highlighting or sort of closing or opening any of those menus. So that's a good one to do. I'm not sure if I think it might do that by default actually. But yeah, that is toggle sidebar and toggle game details. Things like zooming in and out, I don't really need that. But you do have the option to do things like scroll boxes, flip boxes. Now, I will say that this section obviously came around before Big Box, and it's kind of designed in a way to let you control mouse movement. So, for example, move mouse up, down, left, right is currently mapped to the right analog stick. So if I move my, or is it the left analog stick? Yeah, the left one. So I can technically use the left analog stick to navigate around. I could select a game, things like that. Now, anyone who has a handheld device knows that this can get confusing because every application will try and do its own implementation of this. So, for example, Legion Space, which is the sort of overlaid operating system for the Legion Go. The ROG Ally has I think it's called Armory Crate. Ioneo has their ISpace. Every one of these will try and do its own version of sort of mouse movement with a controller. LaunchBox tries to do its own version. Steam tries to do its own version. So it can get very, very complicated. So just be aware of which one you're actually using. You know, if that's not important to you, if you don't need to control mouse movement within LaunchBox, or if it's being handled by another application, like let's say it's being handled by Armory Crate, you can pretty much just turn this off and use Armory Crate's implementation of that. The same goes for Steam, but it's just something to be aware of, that you can actually do that within LaunchBox if you don't have another option. So that's things like mouse movement. I've got exit game mapped to my left trigger. This can be very helpful when you have a whole bunch of different emulators. Rather than configuring a whole bunch of shortcuts within them, what this will do is it will actually close the active window. And so it's useful for sort of exiting out of emulators. We'll actually show that if I boot up a game here. Boot up Mystic Quest. I think Mystic Quest was a bit underrated in my opinion. Got some banging music, but if I press the L2 trigger, it actually just quits out of RetroArch. There are, of course, you'll notice a theme here. The thing is, all of these applications will try and give you their own implementation. Like RetroArch gives you shortcuts to exit. Legion Space will try and force you to use its shortcuts to exit out of applications, and you can technically use all of these things. It's just to be aware of which ones are available, and it's certainly up to you to choose which ones you prefer. I personally prefer to try and configure as much as I can in LaunchBox, because that is the sort of the launchpad for where I'm launching my games, and so I want it to apply across everything. Rather than having to set those shortcuts in emulators, for example, I can just use that exit shortcut, and then it will close the active window that is on screen. Okay. That all makes sense. So we've got an exit shortcut. Hey, another Mystic Quest fan. Definitely bought it back in the day. I think it was my first Final Fantasy, actually. Mystic Quest. Okay, so that is looking good. What we are going to do is we are going to look at the pause screen. Now, Big Box users are probably familiar with this, but what I didn't realize is that you can, of course, enable these if even if you're just using LaunchBox. You want to go to pause screen, you want to say enable pause screen, and we're going to set a shortcut for that. We're going to add a shortcut. We're going to do L3 as our shortcut. We're going to hit OK. We're going to go into Mystic Quest. And now when I press L3, it's going to bring up the LaunchBox pause menu. And there we go. You can access this from within Big Box as well, but I can do things like I can just pause the game. I can view my achievements. I can do some things with save states, and I can actually look at the manual. And of course, I'm using just controllers to navigate all of this. There we go. Looking good. I never actually looked at the Mystic Quest manual. But hey, looking pretty cool. There were shortcuts for zoom. I believe I could use that to actually zoom in and out of this manual. I think that's what that's for. Of course, I'm 100% sure. But yeah, so I can actually just exit the game from the pause menu as well. And there we go. Now, what you'll notice is it kind of does this annoying thing within RetroArch where it's asking you, every time I do that, you'll see in the bottom left how it says press again to quit. And that is actually a RetroArch setting. If you want to turn that off, I believe it is under input and where is it? Confirm quit. So this basically says require the quit hotkey to be pressed twice to quit RetroArch. We actually want to turn that off. And now what will happen is when I press my quit button, it will just nicely and gracefully just exit. It doesn't show me that annoying little notification anymore. And that's what I want. So the pause screen familiar concept, but is very handy and can be used to access various elements of LaunchBox. For example, if you want to look at achievements for a game, let's take Final Fantasy Tactics, for example. I'm going to open up my pause screen. I could go to look at the achievements, and there we go. I can actually see the list of achievements for this game. I can look at that on actual retro achievements. This one's a little finicky because you just have to make sure that you have to make sure that mouse mode is enabled so that you can enable this Cloudflare dialogue. That was something new that was added that has caused a little bit of issues, but you can get past that if you want to look at it on the RA website. But of course, you can just use this list here. Manual, reset, exit, etc. Now, these pause screens can be configured. We're going to look at that when we get into Big Box later on. And then the final shortcut I want to look at is if I go to my pause screen, let's just clear that, is screen capture. So again, you're noticing a theme here. Every single part of Windows will want to try and give you its own version of screen capture. You know, Legion Space has its own screen capture button. Steam has a screen capture button. RetroArch has their own. And what we try and do is we try and hook into RetroArch's... I'm not 100% sure how it works, but the idea is that we take a screenshot and you can then add that screenshot to your screenshots directory. I think that's how it works. So let's give it a try. So if I set a shortcut and I open up a game, go back to, I'm going to echo the dolphin again. Where should we snap the picture? Just get one here. Now, what'll happen is when I close out of LaunchBox. I haven't set that up correctly. It should ask me to save that screenshot. Okay, I think we'll skip over that for now, just because I was a bit ambitious. I haven't actually tested this in advance, but that is what that's for. It will essentially allow you to capture a screenshot and then save it to your screenshots directory so that you can actually view them from within LaunchBox itself. We have a question that says, can you give discount coupons to renew licenses for 1 more year of updates? Well, we do have a license giveaway that will be happening later on in our stream, and that's for a lifetime license. So if you stick around, you might be the lucky winner of that. Okay, now we're going to look at one more thing. The issue that was just on screen earlier, and that is Steam. Now, hands up if anyone has encountered this, because it was driving me absolutely nuts for a while. And once you know what's happening, it's a game changer. Because, like we said, Steam will try and do its own version of all of these things. It has its own screenshot functionality. It has its own controller mapping functionality with Steam input. And what you may have noticed is that when Steam is open, and I'm navigating around LaunchBox, what it's doing is it's doing double inputs. See, when I just press once, it's actually jumping 2 games. It's going up, it's doing it twice, it's going down, it's doing it twice. That happens in Big Box as well. And the reason it's doing that is that it's essentially sending 2 input commands. So LaunchBox is saying move up or down, left, right. And Steam is doing the exact same thing. That's why when I close Steam, that issue doesn't happen. And where this is an issue is if I go to, here we go. If you go into Steam settings and go to controller, it's this section here. It says non-game controller layout and desktop layout. So this little bad boy right here is what's causing that issue. If anyone's ever seen that, this is the reason why. What Steam's trying to do is every controller profile that you have for Steam, it is assuming, hey, I'm going to give you a controller profile that you can use when you're in desktop mode to try and navigate the Windows interface. So again, you'll notice a theme here. But unfortunately, because we are doing that within LaunchBox, this is actually not what we want. And of course, it's causing us to get those double inputs. Not just navigating up and down. If you've tried to confirm, for example, in Big Box, it will jump through 2 sets of menus because it's doing 2 inputs. And so what you want to do is you want to go into this desktop layout, and either you can just disable Steam input if you don't use it, or you can basically go and remove all of these shortcuts. So it's this one here. So the D-pad, for example, is mapped to arrow key up, down, left, right. Now, I'm just going to go and remove those commands. Okay. And now, back in LaunchBox, and now that's much better. So Steam is still running, but now it's giving me single inputs when I'm navigating around. And that is great. That was driving me up the absolute wall for a long time. I've seen a lot of users have this same issue. And again, it's something to be aware of, because maybe what your maybe things like Armory Crate or Legion Space will, I don't think those two do, but other implementations may have their own mappings for your controller. Yes, it's just the joys of running within a Windows environment. But hey, this is why we're here, to try and help you. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to disable Steam input completely so that I don't get those inputs. Obviously, if you do want to use Steam input, just make sure you go and remove all of these commands. You know, like left trigger, right trigger is left click, mouse click. I don't need that because I've got that mapped within LaunchBox. Same with my confirm buttons. Okay. How are we doing? It's been a little bit quiet in the chat. Hope everyone's all right. But if you have any questions, please let us know. I think it's time for a giveaway. But before we do that, we're going to look at one last little tidbit. And that is, a lot of these devices will have back buttons. Back buttons are a pretty sort of up-and-coming thing these days. The Legion Go actually has 4, if you can see. It has 4 back buttons on the back of the controllers. Most controllers will have 2. I have here, for example, an 8-bit Ultimate controller, which is this one right here. They have 2 nice little back buttons. And these can be mapped to controller functions, but they can also be mapped to keyboard presses. And this can be quite helpful because if you don't have enough buttons on your controller to map to some of these functions, so like we were looking at in here, rather than mapping them to actual controller options, you can actually map keyboard presses. Now, these mappings are specifically for controllers, but Big Box, for example, will allow you to do a combination of controller and keyboard as well. A good example I like to use here is if I open up Legion Space. So this is where I can configure all of my back buttons. And I like to map this one down here. I like to go and map this to F12 because that is my screenshot shortcut for Steam. Steam, for example, lets you choose a combination of keys for screenshots. I also like to use F12 in emulators as well for their own screenshot implementation. And therefore, I just have it mapped to one button on the back of my controllers. So this applies, and it's very much personal preference, but it applies across all of LaunchBox. You don't have to just use controller inputs. You can use keyboard inputs and then bind those to your controller. The most popular way is to use these back buttons right here. Okay, we're going to go ahead and do our first giveaway. We have a question. Is it you that's developing the software of RetroBox alone or a team of developers? Oh, well, if you're referring to me personally, it is not me personally who's developing LaunchBox. I am the community manager here, but we do have a team who are hard at work, much smarter than me, who are making this glorious bit of software. We've done some introductions in the past. You may have seen Tharian, our product manager, and some of our developers for Android and Windows. So yes, we are a team. A good old team. Okay, and speaking of team, we're going to do our first giveaway before we jump into Big Box. We have 2 giveaways today. One is for EmuMovies, and one is for LaunchBox. So for those who don't know, EmuMovies is a service that you can use to grab extra media and metadata from their site. They are great for pulling down things like videos and manuals and providing additional box art that you can use. EmuMovies is integrated with LaunchBox. We have integrations for EmuMovies, and when you go through the import process, you can add those additional media types. So they have, it's not a license per se, it's more like a donation that allows you to, I believe, access things like high quality videos, things like that. And so, yes, they have graciously given us some codes. So we are going to do our first giveaway. So let me just set this up. The way this works is you have to pop a keyword into the chat. Now we'll tell you the details just in one moment. Okay, so get your keys ready. The keyword is !movies 2025. If you pop that keyword into the chat, that will enter you into the giveaway. And let's just make sure that this is working. There we go. I can see that coming through. All right, so we'll give that a couple of minutes. We'll let folks drop that keyword into the chat. Fantastic. I can see that coming through. All right, we'll give that a couple of minutes. And we'll give this a chance for folks to ask questions. I hope this has been helpful so far. So we've been focusing on the LaunchBox interface, ways that you can sort of tweak it to a smaller screen size. We're going to look at Big Box in a second, which is where the real fun shines. But yeah, I hope this has been helpful. If anyone has any of their own tips, I'd love to hear them as a handheld user myself. Okay, that's looking good. I can see quite a few entries there. We're going to go ahead and load up Big Box in the meantime. I don't know if anyone saw from CES some very interesting devices. There was... let me just mute that. Yeah, there were some very interesting devices from CES. Obviously, the Legion Go 2, the Legion Go S. I can't remember which company did it, but there was some wild 11-inch handheld, which is absolutely nuts. Atari did a handheld. Yeah, there was a bunch of very interesting devices revealed. But as you can probably tell, I certainly am very much in the handheld camp. Big fan. But like I said, probably will need a proper desktop at some point. Okay, we're going to give it a couple more seconds. If you haven't got your keyword in for the EmuMovies giveaway, !movies 2025. Okay, we're going to go ahead and choose our winner. It will be announced in the chat in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And there we go. It is the regular Andrew Speck. You are the lucky winner of EmuMovies. And EmuMovies, I guess I wouldn't call it license, but yes, code to get you the higher tier. Finally, he says. Hopefully this means you still come to future streams, but I know you're a regular, so I think you deserve this. Fantastic. All you have to do is drop us a message on Twitch. Details. The LaunchBox official, just tap on that name, go to Whisper, which is their DM, and just drop us your name and your email address, and I'll get that to you over after the stream. Thank you very much. And of course, we have a LaunchBox license giveaway that will happen at the end of the stream. That's for Windows and Android lifetime license. Okay. just drop that, Andrew Spec, if you could just drop us that message just so I've got the details, and I'll get that to you afterwards. If you have any issues with messaging that account, then just let me know. Okay, let's crack on. So we're going to look at Big Box next. So I'm sure all of you are familiar. Big Box, of course, comes with LaunchBox Premium, but is the much preferred way of interfacing with LaunchBox and our games in a sort of controller-friendly environment. Obviously, it's used a lot in things like arcade cabinets. It can be used if you're using a controller at your desktop. But personally, I think it is the absolute best way to navigate LaunchBox and your games when you're using a handheld. Not only is it just very controller-friendly for navigating around, you know, you've got a big sort of interface. Everything is accessible with your controller, and all of the options that you could need are accessible. That said, there are even more things that we can do. And Andrew Spec, I've got that message, so thank you very much. That's all good for now. So what do we want to do? What do we want to do in Big Box to make this even more friendly than it already is? For those who don't know, this is the Game Discovery Center. This is a nice way that you can view not only your platforms, but a bunch of different games that have been curated, not just automatically, but we have specific playlists that our team has curated. Let's see if we can find one. We've got things like best games with achievements. We've got different genres, different publishers. Let's find one. Best party games. Here we go. This was one that was curated by our community, actually, during our birthday celebration last year. This was a nice selection of good party games to play. We've got Game of the Year nominations. Of course, my library is a bit smaller, so I don't have too many in there. But of course, I'm just navigating this with a controller. It's up, down, left, right. You know, controllers are actually mapped by default. So, you know, if you use an Xbox controller, all of the embedded controllers on these handhelds, a lot of the controls will be mapped automatically. So things like back out to the navigation system menu, and then, of course, controlling all of these options is all accessible with a controller. But I want to make this even better. Now, like I said, the first thing to note is that the controller and mappings, these are actually different within Big Box. I know a lot of the functions are the same, but if you've configured it within LaunchBox and you say, hey, why is it not working within Big Box? That is because they are actually separate mappings. So it's just the first thing to be aware of. So the shortcuts themselves are different, and look, Big Box, I would say, is the one area where you do want to be just cautious of the TDP of the device that you're running. So, for example, my Legion Go here right now is set to max, although actually, yeah, so this TDP, without getting into too much detail, the higher, the more power you're pushing at it, right? Obviously, on battery, you want to make sure that that's a trade-off with what performance you're getting versus the battery life. And like I said, Big Box will run absolutely fine. So even if I whack this all the way down to a 5-watt TDP, it will technically run fine. You may start to see issues when it comes to things like transitions, navigating between different views. If you've got loads of media, if you're using a particularly heavy theme, this TDP may limit that a little bit. I can't say for certain, but it's just to be aware of what you're running. Like I said, it doesn't need a huge amount of power to be able to run, you know, at its capacity. And more than likely, you'll have it set for the games rather than Big Boxes. But it is just something to be aware of. For me, for now, I've just got it set to a sort of performance profile, and that's enough. For me, Big Box runs absolutely fine with that profile. But yes, of course, instead of Legion Space, Handheld Companion, I've heard really good things about Handheld Companion, and you can set app profiles. Legion Space is definitely, in my opinion, a little bit far behind. I feel like it doesn't get as much love as things like Armory Crate, and of course, Handheld Companion is a fantastic addition because of those per game profiles. It's something I think they're really missing out on. So yes, of course, in that case, you could set a specific profile that's for Big Box, and then you can obviously ramp that TDP up when you're in the game specifically. But yeah, that's a really good idea. So you're running Big Box at full power, and then for PS1, of course, it just drops it down to 9 watts. That's really cool. Yeah, I was going to use Handheld Companion before they added the ability to map back buttons to keyboard shortcuts. But then they added it, and it kind of worked for me, so I haven't got around to using Handheld Companion. But no, I hear really, really good things about that. Thanks for the tip. All right, so we're going to go into options, and we are going to look at the one we want here is controller and controller mappings. You have keyboard mappings, and those are similar functions, but for keyboard. But what we want is controller. Now, these are the same settings from LaunchBox. Enable all controllers we talked about previously. It works the same way where you have a... if you have multiple controllers like an arcade stick that you want to control Big Box plus an external controller, you can use all controllers. Enable game controllers is just turning on using controllers. So you want to make sure that you have that on. There are some additional options in Big Box as well. But controller mappings, we actually get a lot more at our disposal. So not just the navigating like up, down, left, right. We can do things like open various views like achievement profiles. We can actually switch views within Big Box. We can actually even have shortcuts that go to specific sections. So things like our platforms, the Discovery Center, the platform categories. This is all really, really useful stuff. And it doesn't come mapped out of the box, but I would recommend setting this if you're using a controller first to navigate Big Box. So let's look at one example. Let's go back to platform categories, for example. Now, right now, I just have a keyboard shortcut set to change my view. I can change it from platform wheel to a text list, for example. Or if I'm in a specific platform, I can change it from a wall view to, say, like a vertical wheel. But this is using a keyboard, and that's not very intuitive for what I want. So I'm going to go into options, and I'm going to map the switch view option. There we go. What should we do? I'm just going to put that as... just put that as my left trigger for now. Now, what's interesting about this section here is that you can combine controller shortcuts. You don't just have to use one button because, of course, we're limited with the amount of inputs we have. So what I can do, for example, is I can do, say, right trigger plus up on the D-pad. And that's actually a bad example because it's already mapped to something else. Let me do that. Let's do... We're doing R3 plus up on the D-pad. You can see here it says button 10 plus D-pad up. And that's cool. What that's going to do is if I'm in my platform categories, let's go into a console, and I press R3 plus up on the controller. That was a bad example. Let's try that again. I think I was setting this up earlier, so I think I have multiple inputs mapped to the same thing. Let's just keep that simple. Let's go there. Oops. Got quite a few things set. Okay. Try that again. This is what I get for trying to set things up in advance. Okay. I think you get the idea. I'm going to go to my platforms. I can go to my game. And now with my controller shortcut, I can simply access the view. There we go. Okay. So I've got a horizontal wheel. The one I really like is cover flow with details. So I can use the controller to scroll through these. Now, by default, we've shown this off before, but my favorite aspect of cover flow is that you can spin the box, and that is mapped to the right analog stick. This comes out of the box. If we go to full screen cover flow, it's looking even nicer. You can use that right stick to spin the box. And of course, that works when we are in the game's detail view. If I want to look at 3D model, I can do that in full screen. And of course, I can spin the box. Again, all just with a controller. So that is looking good. Now, there's two other things that I want to map that I think are particularly useful. We go back into our controller mappings, and that is my search and filter. These are pretty handy to have mapped to a controller, in my opinion. And that is because, let's say we're on the platforms view, and any view actually. I could go to the Game Discovery Center, and I want to search for a game. Now, I've mapped search to the left trigger on my controller. You can actually see in the bottom right, there is a shortcut that's been added for LT. It says search. When you add certain shortcuts in Big Box, they will actually show at the bottom and what the corresponding button input is, which is quite nice. So I'm going to do LT and search. Now, that is going to bring up the on-screen keyboard. Now, I think I do it. There we go. Now, this is a little finicky because what it's basically doing is LaunchBox has its own on-screen keyboard, and then in order to actually accept inputs from a touch screen, you will actually have to use the Windows on-screen keyboard. So it doesn't look great. You can actually resize it so it kind of covers that up, but it does work. So for example, if I were to reach over and search for Sonic, for example, and there we go. That has just done a nice quick search for me. And of course, I'm docked at the moment, but if I was using my handheld, then I could use the touchscreen to accept inputs there. So I've mapped that to a button, which is my left trigger. I can just search. Got my multiple keyboards there, but we'll deal with that. But what I've mapped to the right trigger is filter. So much like how you can filter in LaunchBox, you can do it in Big Box. I can just press R2, and that brings up my filter option. Again, just using controllers here. And I can actually specify a filter. So I'm going to say, show me games where favorite is true. So show me my favorite games. And that has combined those two things. So it's combined the search that I did, which was for Sonic, and it is then filtered by games that are favorite. So this is a really nice way that I can narrow things down in Big Box. I can, of course, navigate through my playlist, but if I want to just do things on the fly, then I can do that as well with search and filter. Two shortcuts that I highly recommend mapping because they do provide a lot of value there. All right. So one of the other things we want to map is, if we go to controller mappings, we do want to have I can find it, pause screen. Same as what we did in LaunchBox, but we need to map this here. So I'm going to give my L3 a shortcut for pause screen. We're going to go and we're going to launch a game. Open up Echo the Dolphin again. There we go. We've got that nice start screen. If I press L3 on my controller, then I get the same pause screen. It's looking nice. So I can exit from here. I can do all of the other stuff that we've talked about. What does the manual look like for Echo the Dolphin? Good old black and white manual here. Okay. So pause screen, very helpful. Again, I can use that that exit shortcut. We could do the same thing there. You could exit from your pause menu. Let's find which one it is in Big Box. Exit, yes, this one. So if you wanted to have a single keyboard shortcut or combination, you know, the nice thing about within Big Box is you can do that combination of controllers. So let's say I could do like R3 plus down on the D-pad, and that will give me a controller shortcut for closing out of the active window. We've got our shortcut for switching views. You can even switch themes with a controller. So if you want to navigate through your various sections and change the theme on the fly, again, anything that you see here can be mapped to a controller. So definitely spend some time going through, seeing what works for you and what you want to have access to. I personally like search and filter. I don't really need things like music tracks. You might want to have a shortcut for starting a tracked mode. The final thing that I like to do is actually map these different views. So things like Discovery Center, all games, platform categories. I'm going to map some of these. So I'm going to use the Y button plus up on the D-pad. And then I'm going to do like Y button plus left for... let's do Y plus left for all games, Y plus right for platforms, and Y plus down for platform categories. And that means, you know, rather than having to back out to the system menu and go to, you know, view these various sections, I can just use that controller shortcut. So right now I'm looking at the Game Discovery Center. I can use that shortcut to simply pop over to my, this is my, what is it? I guess game view. All games, yes. I could pop over to my platforms view. I could pop over to the Game Discovery Center. So I don't have to back out to the system menu every single time to do that. I'm all just doing that with a nice little controller shortcut. Yeah. Looking good, looking good. So we've done pause menus, we've done shortcuts. This is all now looking pretty nice. I'm fully capable of navigating this with a controller. The only thing I would say you might want to do is just have a look through the settings and turn off bits of metadata that you don't want. Obviously, when we're running on a smaller screen size, you may not want to see everything. So for example, under views, you can do things like, where is it? Sorry, these sections here, so things like on the game details, the game menu, these are various bits of metadata that you can actually just turn off. It's not really going to change much per se. The UI sort of accommodates all of these, but if you don't only want to focus on certain bits of information, you can just turn these off. So for example, I don't really need to see things like region or the source. I don't really care about the various things that you can just turn on and off here. Game version I don't need. And that will show me what is showing up on the game's details view, which is here. Okay, so we are going to look at one more aspect, which is under General, this little bad boy right here, which is enable using Big Box as the Windows shell. Now, this is definitely more of a power feature, and I certainly wouldn't recommend doing this unless you really know what you're doing. Now, the primary use case I've seen people use this for is mostly arcade cabinets, where it's a dedicated device that is, you want it to just boot into Big Box, and you don't want to be able to navigate out of Big Box or have any of the sort of Windows stuff interfering with it. The long story short, I'm sure you know what this does, but this basically means that when you power on your machine, it will actually load straight into Big Box. There is a big sort of warning that I highly recommend reading. The reason being, if you don't know what you're doing, it's very easy to lock yourself out of your machine by doing this. And I personally haven't tried this on a handheld per se, but it could be an option. If you have set this up and you're very happy with the Big Box setup, you want to sort of bypass all of that Windows stuff when you open up your device, you can turn this on. Obviously, use it with caution, because what it will do is when you start up the device for the first time, it will go straight into Big Box. You can, of course, just go into Windows, open the app, and that's fine. What I personally do is, once I'm in Big Box, it's actually fine to say sleep the device with Big Box still open, and then you just open it up again, and everything's still there. It's just running. It picks up where it left off. You don't have to close out of Big Box every single time you put the device to sleep. But this is definitely more of a power feature if you want to really have that sort of dedicated experience. You're very committed to Big Box. You want it to be that front end. You don't care about any of the other Windows stuff. You can have it act as the Windows shell. Okay. And so then, where does that leave us? Well, now we have a very friendly interface. I can actually launch all of my games from here. I can exit my games. I've got shortcuts. I can filter and search. I'm pretty much set now. I don't really have to use a mouse and keyboard at all. So if I'm running on a handheld, this setup now enables me to just get into my games, get out of my games. I can sleep the device when I'm done with it, and I can stay within Big Box. There's no reason that I really have to jump out of it. This is a very nice setup for me, but the final thing is that you can, of course, utilize different themes that may lend themselves better to a handheld device. So if I go to Manage Themes, and I've got a couple of themes installed here. I've got things like Coverbox, you've got Critical Zone, Unified Refried, it's quite nice. But let's just go with Coverbox. Let's do Apply as Main Theme. Let's go to our platforms. Forms. There we are. And there we go. This is actually looking very nice. Nice full screen videos that will play. I can scroll through using my controller. I can enter all of these sections with my controller. And here we go. This is looking very, very nice. Anyone play Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban on the Game Boy Advance? Looks a bit like Golden Sun, doesn't it? Like a Harry Potter version of Golden Sun. But if anyone has, I'd be curious, maybe AndrewSpec, if you're running Legion Go, what theme do you use on Big Box? I personally just stick with the default, but if there is a interesting one that looks nice for handhelds, then I'd love to check it out. Because that does actually bring us to the end of our stream. I think we've covered most of the main points here. As someone who is a daily driver of this stuff, I'm personally very happy with what Big Box can do. I certainly would recommend Big Box over LaunchBox for that sort of unified interface. But as we've hopefully covered, there are ways that you can do both. If you only have access to LaunchBox, there are ways that you can make it work. Leveraging that touchscreen and various controller inputs, whereas of course Big Box is that controller first interface. Okay. So I think we are going to do our LaunchBox giveaway. This is our LaunchBox license giveaway. So just to recap, for anyone who does not have a lifetime version of LaunchBox for Windows or Android, this is your chance. We do ask that folks who have a lifetime version of both to please not enter this, just because we will be able to see, and unfortunately we won't be able to give you a second version. But if you don't, then this is your lucky day. Let me just get this set up. So again, the format is very much the same. It will be a keyword. Okay, and the keyword is exclamation mark LB 2025. It is 25 after all. And this is LaunchBox. So exclamation mark LB 2025 will enter you into the giveaway. And I see, I think it's Marzipants. You've put the keyword for the movies giveaway, which is already closed. So you might just want to, oh, there you go. Yep, yours has come through now. Although I think you spelt that wrong, I'm afraid. You might want to do that again just so it's entered correctly. Yeah, just double check your spelling. It has to be typed exactly in order for it to be counted. Lovely. Got a few coming through there. All looks good. So we're going to give that a couple of minutes, but that does take us to the end of the stream. Andrew Speck says, I'm using the Aeon MQ7, but I'm changing themes very often. Fantastic. Well, hopefully you've got a nice controller shortcut there mapped to changing themes, make it nice and easy for you. But yeah, of course, there's no restriction to sticking with one theme. It could really be, what am I in the mood for today? Or what platform do I want to view? And I switch up the theme accordingly. Fishbot, thank you very much. Fun stream. Hope you've enjoyed it. If anyone has any recommendations for handhelds to watch out for in 2025, I'm always on the lookout. I think I personally was very impressed with the ROG Ally X. I really did love their implementation there. The only reason I actually went for a Legion Go was because at the time, the original ROG Ally didn't support... the USB port was not Thunderbolt compatible, I believe. And so you couldn't use an external GPU with it. So the way I have it set up is I have an external GPU, which is housed in an enclosure, and I can actually dock the Legion Go to this GPU, which means that I can give it a bit more welly when I'm playing desktop, whereas I can undock it and then play it on the go. But yeah, the original ROG Ally did not support Thunderbolt, which is the connection that I needed, so I went with the Legion Go, but I think I would have gone with the ROG Ally X. Yes, of course, you set the shortcuts and then we always forget them. I definitely do that as well. I say, oh, I'm going to set up all these great things, and I just end up resorting to the touchscreen. But I think a lot to look forward to in 2025 with handhelds, of course. Steam officially being available on SteamOS officially being available on certain devices is really going to up the ante. Certainly up the ante on our side for what we're working on. But yeah, just even outside of that, I think there's a big market for handhelds. I think it's a great way to enjoy these. And, you know, we want LaunchBox to be a nice complement to that. All right. We'll give it a few more minutes for... I can still see some entries coming in for the LaunchBox license giveaway, which is !LB 2025. Got a nice few entries there. We did an exciting stream a few weeks ago about the Sega Dreamcast, which was really fun to put together, actually, and I actually really enjoyed doing that. I'm planning to do similar streams for different consoles. So if there's any particular console you would love to see covered, and that is sort of, you know, building a specific LaunchBox library for that console. We looked at very specific settings to do with emulation and things like that. Some contenders that I'm thinking of right now, maybe the PlayStation 1, maybe the Nintendo GameCube. They have a lot of fun things that you can do with emulation and even within LaunchBox as well. All right, so we're going to go and pull our winner. And absolutely, yes, PS1 has some fantastic games. Too many to count. Let us know your favorites. I'm going to go and pull this winner. So any last minute entries, !LB 2025. We're going to pull this in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And there we go. I'm going to butcher the username. I think it's Marzi Pen. Something along those lines, but congratulations. Well, hey, you are the lucky winner of a LaunchBox license. Now, with this one, again, just click on the LaunchBox official username in the chat and send us a whisper or a DM. And with this one, we just need your name, your email, and which platform you need, so whether it's Windows or Android. If you can drop me that message now, just so I've got those details, and I will send you that after the stream closes down.